called bel canto as well. But bel canto, especially in singers, is a specialized period of time where it was all about showcasing the voice and showing everything that it could do and how beautiful it could be. And so as we get later into the 19th century, we get kind of this whole other German influence that goes on. But up to now, right now in this period, with Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti, and then even early Verdi, we're doing this bel canto period style of singing. And what is amazing is, especially during the time, there's so much stuff that is in the music, but not literally written down. And so, for instance, singers would see stuff on the page and they would know that they need to do a messa da voce, which means that they're going to crescendo to the middle of the phrase and they're going to decrescendo from the phrase. And they wouldn't literally write the crescendos like into the music. Literally, they knew that like, I'm going to start soft and I'm going to get loud and then I'm going to get soft again, because that's what made a beautiful musical phrase. Rossini is he is part of this period and then not. He's an anomaly. And part of it, he's kind of almost like a pop star in and of himself. And crazy enough, he was 24 when this opera came to life. And so with that, I'm like, I can just see now like a crazy 24-year-old energy that is just like busting at the seams. And what's really kind of unique with Rossini is at the top of his career, he wrote 39 operas. And at the top of his career, he's just like, okay, I'm good. I got money. I'm just going to kind of do his. So it's kind of like, we usually think of the artist or the composer as this kind of, I have this thing to say. And Rossini is kind of the antithesis of this. He's just totally like, okay, I've made my money. I'm good. I'm going to go and eat lots of pizza and drink lots of wine in Italy.
In a weird way, it makes me think of the Monkees, who I love. I grew up listening to the Monkees with my dad. And when you read about how they created music, it was such a machine. I mean, they had great songwriters and they got some great front guys and got them all to look mildly organized and put amazing music, well, at least I think it's amazing and fun music out into the world, but with, there was no heartfelt pouring out of, soul words. It was really more, we're going to have a wonderful time. Everyone's going to have fun listening to this music. And we're not going to worry about authentic, like from my soul kind of communication, just fun. And there is a lot of that in here. And it's also in some ways used as a shield in music of this ilk. So we'll say a comedy, but with some heft to it underneath. So sometimes the comedy is used almost to allow the playwright and the composer to say things they wouldn't normally be allowed to say. And there's a few other ways that they've managed to do that with this opera, but the style of the music presentation is a big part of it. And John mentioned those 39 operas. Those 39 operas were written before Rossini turned 40. So this is music written by a young man, right? Like he never had that reflective, I'm sitting in my rocking chair on a porch and I have a meaningful life lesson to share with you. He didn't write operas from that era at all. So when he put his pen down, it was down. So when we talk about this being kind of pop music, it's got a lot of energy to it and a lot of movement to it. And John and I were both laughing. I call myself a recovering soprano. I've sung for a long time in my life and I performed for a living for a while, and John still performs, and neither one of us sing Rossini. It takes a very special voice to do that because it never stops moving. So there's no easy breath. He and I had talked about how in bel canto, actually in that specific era, a lot of that music has a freedom to it in how you interpret it, in how you write cadenzas, which is kind of rewriting sections of the music, but with, where the composer wants you to do that and wants you not to. So what you hear in Rossini is pretty much all cadenza. There's so much movement, the notes just burble up. They're always rolling forward. You grab a little breath here, you keep rolling. Whereas in a lot of the rest of bel cantos, the music of that era, you have these long, elegant, fluid lines, and you take a breath and you can just hang out because the orchestra will wait for you. And then you come back in and it's all elegance and grace and flow. And the cadenza is a little tiny bit of pepper in a very, simple, beautiful, but beautiful in its simplicity piece. Rossini is all of the pepper. He's just all pepper. So we were laughing because to us, we really pictured the singers who specialize in Rossini as gymnasts. And it's that, watching someone do something that you can't even fathom doing with your body. The Rossini singers can do that in a way that just takes my breath away. I don't know how else to say it.
So for example, I have Marilyn Horn kind of queued up for a little 30-second clip. This is in Una voce poco fa, but what you're gonna see is it's not only, it's fast, but they also like go all over the range. Like a lot of times, so like the voice is built where we have like a break here and then a break there. And Rossini's like, oh, I don't care where the breaks are. I'm gonna take you from the top of your voice all the way to the bottom of your voice in less than 5 seconds. And as Maggie was saying, like that little clip is hard enough on its own, but that is 30 seconds of a 6-minute aria.
And the whole thing's like that.
and so I also am in awe of the people that can remember all of them, because like each of the different phrases that they come back in will be very similar but slightly different. And so like just the memory that it takes to know where I'm going. And then if you got off, like, oh gosh, hopefully the conductor can get you back on the train that is just moving and never stops.
It's really remarkable. And then you add, when we talk about composers, and we've discussed that Rossini was a really young composer, although contextually many of them were young. Each of them composed in a different way. And I've always liked, I don't have any examples for you today, but go find them on the internet, looking at what the written scores, the handwritten scores look like from composers. Some of them are perfect the first time. They write it down and it's perfect. And some of them are so scratched out that they scratch right through the paper. And you can hardly see what notes they've ended up with because they corrected themselves over and over and over again. The same is true for their style of communicating to their performers. So some of them, and I use the example of Puccini often, when you're in music school and you're learning to sing Puccini, everybody likes to just give into the music because it's really fun movie. I call it movie music. It's like lush, beautiful lines, right? And I had a teacher who would say, if you're feeling all the feelings, your audience isn't feeling anything. Look at the page. And Puccini wrote in every crescendo, every time you should get louder, every day crescendo, every time it should be a short note, where you should speed up a little, where you should slow down. It's all in there. So you don't have to think. You just have to do what he said. And in fact, if you're singing beautiful Puccini, you're probably singing exactly what he put on the page. Other composers were a little bit less informative and they left something to the imagination. The metronome was not something where they had a nice rhythmic, shared universal understanding of tempo. So some people interpreted tempo markings in different ways. And some people didn't give you any clues. If you're looking at Bach, for example, and the older ones are really good models for this, you got a lot less instruction on the page than you did from people who were writing around the turn of the century. So when we look at Rossini, you always wonder, is this a composer who gives you all the answers or a composer who really makes you dig and figure out what it means to you? Well, not only does he give you some room to personalize it, which was very typical of that era of composing, but he would also change his own compositions for the singer. So it's very cool. The lead role here for the woman is written for a mezzo. And often that's given to a soprano, especially with the coloratura. People love a coloratura soprano. It's got that light, floaty, magical thing to it. But this is an earthy, beautiful, loaded with color role. But if he ended up with a soprano singing it, he shrugged his shoulders and rewrote it for a soprano. So there was a lot of flexibility in his commitment to the work that not a lot of composers can relate to. Funny side story, Mozart would also write music specifically for the singers, but he tended not to like his leading ladies. So in some of his arias, he wrote them specifically because he had a soprano who liked to raise her head for high notes and drop it for low notes. And he would make it ping, pong, top, bottom, because she would do this and looked ridiculous on stage. So these are people. I mean, they were telling stories, and a lot of composers were also doing their own stage direction at this era. They had a lot of control over the shows that they were putting together. And you can see the flexibility in how many different variations of a show come out. So we often have conversations with Barber, whether we prefer it with her a soprano or a mezzo, and it exists in both forms. John, do you want to talk a little more about the color?
Yeah, so what I think, because most of the time, most of Rossini's leading ladies are mezzo, or at least predominantly that's who it was originally written for. And there is, because the leading lady is a mezzo and the tenor is the leading man and the love interest. And so a lot of times they share a range together. So it's like, because like the middle C for a tenor is the same middle C that the mezzo is going down to. But it's like the tenor is very almost when I did Italian Girl many years ago or whatever, I remember the tenor sounded like it was almost like this white sound. It was just so light that there was no color to the voice. And the mezzo that was in it was almost a contralto. So there was just like this dark heaviness to it. And so whenever they would like play off of each other, it was like he was playing with musical sounds. So it's like, okay, he wanted like the mezzo to sound like a beautiful clarinet or oboe, and then the tenor was going to be this other instrument that was so light. I put up 2 clips, for instance, just to give you an idea of what I mean by a light sound, because I know that that sounds kind of foreign to us, but I got 2 tenors on 2 different clips. So this is Juan Diego Flores singing a part of Eco Ridente, and then I'm going to move right into another clip that's going to show you Jonas Kaufmann singing a little bit of Tosca. And so, like night and day, I'm sure your ears are going to hear the difference. So remember that sound, and then this is a tenor singing in almost the exact same range. So just so that you can tell, like, so when we say that there's a specific person that usually sings Rossini, there's a total reason for that. Like it's a totally color difference. Could anybody not hear the color difference? Or do you feel pretty like those are different tenors? Okay, awesome. This feels weird virtually, doesn't it? The response back.
In the meantime, I'm thinking, I need to get my parents on this call. I think my mom would love that.
And so, but I also want to just kind of also talking about like how Rossini loved improv. So it's like, there's parts of it is like, okay, this is what up to this section, and then I want you to show off. There has been always a tradition in opera that started back in the early 18th century where like we've kind of had different moments where it's kind of the moment of the composer, the moment of the singer. And especially in the early 18th century, there was like the singers ran the show. if you were a famous singer, you could make the composer kind of write to your whim, and they would show you off. And so there, in an opera, we call this, like, sometimes they would stop the show to bring on their favorite song that they sang so well, and we call that a suitcase aria. So literally, like, a singer would be like, okay, we're going to do Don Giovanni today, but I don't care. I really like this German song from Magic Flute, and I'm going to sing it for you right now in the middle of the show, and I'm going to stop everything in its tracks to do that. The nice thing about Rossini is he almost kind of welcomes it, like, in the way he writes. So in Barber of Seville, there is a music lesson that happens. And so, for instance, a very famous soprano, Beverly Sills, playing Rosina, decided that was a perfect time to do kind of a 7-minute aria to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and also have kind of a competition with the flautist on stage.
And for context, this became a competition then for the singers in our more modern era of what were they going to bring on stage during the music lesson. So each singer had their own opportunity, and Rossini built it right in for them, right? So we kind of brought this tradition all the way forward to today, where they get to go, okay, I'm doing this. And however outlandish they could make it, the better it would be in the show, right? It's this moment of out of time, out of place, out of style, all about the singer. So as I'm sure you can imagine, they enjoy that just a little bit.
And mind you, I'm about 5 minutes into this 6-minute aria. And so I'm in the cadenza area. So I'm going to hear a little twinkle and a little bit of her competing with the flautist. But there's so much other acrobats that she does vocally in this. So I recommend you checking out Beverly Sills in Barber of Seville if you get the time. So now her competition. So then she'll change keys a zillion times, and by the end of it, she outsings the flute all the way at the top of its register, and so she wins the battle between voice and instrument. The other part that is traditional to this is that the music, it just lends itself for hijinks that, like, even modern day other artists of other forms, even in the animated form, have figured out how to utilize the music of Rossini. I'm going to give it over to Christine here to take over the screens for a second. So I'm sure you've all seen this.
Oh, I was going to say, I still hear it.
And if you didn't realize that, that is actually the overture to The Barber of Seville. And
one of the most famous overtures in opera.
And he kept playing with sounds, because there had been also a tradition that kind of got elevated by Mozart we were talking a little bit about the comic opera in general. Up to kind of Mozart, comic opera was kind of street opera. It wasn't kind of thought of as high art. Up to that time, it was opera seria, and opera was like, excuse me, with donors and like with the royalty. That's where opera was mostly being held. And so a lot of times the composers had to kind of feel like, okay, how am I going to write to stroke the ego of whoever's paying for this opera to be going on? So they did a lot of operas about kings and queens and royalty and gods and goddesses. And by the time we have Mozart doing the Marriage of Figaro, which is actually the sequel to the Barber of Seville, he's elevated the opera buffa to have the characters, like in this buffo character, like the bass character does this patter. And a lot of times it's kind of, it could be servants and things like that, almost talking under their breath about what they felt about the people that were above them. And so I do have another clip there in a second, but the other nice thing about opera buffa is it brings in kind of this so the commedia dell'arte is kind of a theatrical way to help audiences understand the show before they even got there. And so it's a long time in the theater community that we'd have like the hero, the heroine, somebody that is like the best friend that just jokes around. The evil person is the most evil as possible. The best way to describe it is kind of a Julia Roberts rom-com. And so before you even see the show, you kind of know where to put all of the different characters and whether to like them, not like them, or how to hate them. And so
it grew out of Punch and Judy. The art form is called Commedia dell'arte, and we don't have a lot of documentation on it because it was street art. And it was really as simplistic as you could get because people would walk into it, they'd walk out of it. We wanted them to understand exactly who was who immediately because there was no time to build. And this is one of the greatest alignments in opera. And in fact, Commedia dell'arte has survived because of opera, because it's been written in so carefully. This has become the written history of that art form in a way that we don't have in a lot of other contexts. Sorry, John.
No, it's all good. So part of especially the opera version of Commedia dell'arte is what we call patter. And so in patter, so it was less about like you understanding all the words. It was more about, I'm going to spit out a tongue twister at you and you're just going to hear, it's almost like a rhythm thing. And by the time of Mozart, he was using this pattern not just to be a buffoon, but actually somebody that was just like you're so frustrated at somebody that you have nothing else, like you just have to get it out of your system. So in Barber of Seville, we have what is called Dr. Bartolo's aria. He is basically telling Rosina, who is locked away, that no, I lock the door when I go away and you have to be here alone, kind of thing. And so he's kind of disciplining her kind of in a way.
Signorina un'altra volta quando battono da fuori, signorina un'altra volta quando battono da fuori, la consigliere Vittorio Giovanni da saprà. Signorina un'altra volta quando battono da fuori, signorina un'altra volta quando battono da fuori, la consigliere Vittorio Giovanni da saprà. E non sono le spalle, già pure la carta morta, ma c'è quella che camarra. Come dopo quella porta, come dopo quella porta, ne vedrà, come tra, come dopo quella porta, ne vedrà.
So he's almost like a parent just being like, don't pout at me. And he's just so frustrated that he doesn't have any other words, like, or all the words are coming out so fast that it's almost intangible.
Do you hear the nowhere to breathe and the never stopping? Every time I hear those, I'm just like, oh man, I feel bad for you. It's amazing. I love to hear it. Guys, we are closing in on the end of our time, and John and I could go on about this all night because we love this stuff, but I want to see if anyone has questions.
Silence.
Oh, I see one, Sherry. Christine's gonna unmute you.
There you go. Okay. It's kind of an observation. It's not a good comparison, but the way you talk about Rossini and his energy and the way he wrote the music and how almost frenetic it is. Years ago, I was a choral singer and at Carthage College, and we were told that we were going to do, instead of the classical stuff, we were going to do folk music. And it's like, oh, a nice break, folk music. It was Aaron Copland. I have never sung such complex music ever. It was remarkable, and it reminds me of the way you describe Rossini.
That's amazing. And yes, I agree. I have sung Copland. It sounds very simple when you're listening to it. Trying to create it, it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, how many voices are there?
Yeah, that's a great story. Folk music for the prayer, sure.
I don't think of Rossini necessarily as simple. I think he's very, at least as an audience person, digestible.
Yes.
And so that's where he's a great intro to opera for people going to shows, because you're gonna leave having a great time. Generally, I don't think he has any shows that anybody dies, and there's
where.
Yeah, and on top of that, he just, the comedy isn't so much that it's poking fun directly at anybody. It's more just kind of scenes that just are so bizarre, or like situational comedy that is so wonderfully thought out that that whatever is going to, the hijinks that's about to occur as an audience member, but you still just keep coming back to it. I know, like with Figaro, or with Marriage of Figaro, I talk about a good like Frasier comedy. Barber is in that same vein. It's kind of like, that like they're hiding behind the door, they're going to be found out, etc. Like, and the fun is in just kind of waiting and watching it unwind itself.
And the timing, and it's all over the top. Christine?
And something else I wanted to mention too is, so I'm learning a lot about opera as we're going along, because I'm very much a newbie, and getting my lessons from John and Maggie is spectacular. It's so much fun. So John taught me all about Marriage of Figaro. Again, he played it just like a Frasier comedy. I learned and I absorbed it so much. But when you were talking about Rossini, and you said he's like the pop star of the day, because he could write the songs so quickly, and you compared him to like an Ariana Grande with a formula, or no, Christina Aguilera.
So a lot of times, like especially at Rossini, it doesn't necessarily make it easy to sing, but it was kind of like you can almost like see like the different parts that he wrote, and like he would copy from himself. And when we say he's a pop star, like we literally mean that, like not in like in a downing way. We mean it that like people loved him so much that like if he wasn't at the theater, they went to his house to cheer him on. That
Actually, for the opening night, this show was kind of cursed. So I don't know how many of you know the story of Macbeth in the theater, but nobody will say that in a theater. They say the Scottish play. It's considered really bad luck. And this show for a long time was in the same vein, because so many things went wrong. So the owner of the theater died 2 weeks before this show. There was a fire. The lead singer got a black eye or a broken nose or something during the show. Everything went wrong. And then you had the audience, because of a rivalry with a different composer, yelling at him and yelling at the stage during the whole show. So the opening night was awful. And Rossini said, screw this, I'm not going back. Well, he was supposed to conduct. So he just decided not to go on night 2. And on night 2, none of the other angry people went either, right? The ones going to yell at him because he was touching the same topic as their hero. And the show went on much more smoothly, and it was beautiful. So the audience ended up going to his house, trying to make him come out so they could congratulate him on the show. And he was such a curmudgeon and so irritated that he was just kind of like, you can't make me go out there. And left them standing in the street, and it actually got a little ugly. I think they were throwing tomatoes, like actually throwing tomatoes at the house, trying to make him come out. So this is one of those pieces where in that opening moment, they hated it. It was panned, and Rossini was like, ugh. And I can just picture him being like, I'll just write something else, right? And instead it turned into one of the longest lasting, biggest shows in opera. I would put this in the top, I don't know, 20 or 30. It's a great piece. So at any rate, we're going to wrap up because I know everyone's got stuff to do tonight, but thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you'll join us for another one. We're going to listen to Porgy and Bess next week. And if you want to dive into a little more of the trivia on this opera or Porgy and Bess or any number of other ones, Quarantine Opera, which is on our FlorentineOpera.org and also on its own quarantinedopera.org sites, has a bunch of these, and we've put in some clips for you to listen to, some of the cool little stories around the operas, and of course, the most important part is John's cocktail. He has matched a cocktail to each show, so you can have the full experience.
With the fabulous matching jacket. And yes.
There you go.
Dresses
Exactly.
up.
He's always dressed for the occasion.
Yes.
So thank you all so, so much for being here. I hope we will see you again. And thank you for brightening up my afternoon. I'll see you all soon.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.